Alright, so I recorded this for 10 minutes, but I didn't have any audio, so we're gonna run it back. But I have more experience now, so it'll be a better experience for you guys. Alright, so it's a fluid simulation. If you're familiar with fluid simulations, the first thing you start off with is a domain. So you make a cube usually, and then you go to physics and you turn on, I use flip fluids, but you can turn on fluid if you don't have it, and that'll give you this fluid simulation, and you pick the type, and it's domain. It's the same for Mantaflow, same way, and that's how you start. That's like where your fluid can go. It's where it lives. So most of the settings for Flip I usually edit in the domain, but we'll go over the other stuff first real quick, just so we know what's up, because it's pretty simple. So I have this fluid object. It's just a cube that is fluid. So when the simulation starts, that starts as fluid. And then I have this, which is a force field. That's unique to Flip. A big part of why I like it is they have this experimental build with these force fields. Basically, it makes like a gravity object that sucks water in or repels it or whatever. So I've been experimenting with those a lot. I have the gravity keyframe. I forgot about that. All right, well that explains that. All right, so so I have this force field object, and I have it keyframed to spin around, and I also have the anti-gravity keyframed. I just realized. But yeah, in terms of what's in the simulation, it's just that. It's just the fluid and the force field, and that lives in the domain. So pretty simple to set up, but there's a lot of domain settings I tweak. So first things first, grid resolution. Usually I test my bakes at like 70 to 90 resolution just to make sure they look all right, and I test them a lot. I would highly recommend doing it that way so that you just don't mess anything up, because the final bakes you want to do at like, I don't know, 250 plus resolution up to like 350 or 400, depending on how good your CPU is and how much time you have. So I like to test them at low res first, make sure everything's perfect before I give it the time to bake at high res. A nice thing about flip fluids is that you can pause and resume your bakes, so I use that a lot, and you can preview them while they're running. So if you get 20 frames in and you're like, wait, that doesn't look right, you can go back and reset some stuff. So do that a lot. And then another thing I change usually is the speed. Fluid, water naturally moves very fast, and so like for the most part, these simulations look just really fast, like you're pouring or splashing water all over the place. So in order to get that nice fluid, pulsy kind of motion or whatever, I like to turn the speed way down to like 0.3, 0.2, sometimes 0.1. Excuse me. All right, so next up, let's see, I turn on the whitewater always. That's all these little particles and stuff. They give like a cause and effect kind of in the animation, like as things splash together, it makes particles, and particles live some places and die other places. So it really just adds a lot of like dynamics to the simulation, which I'm learning in fluids is a big deal. You want things to be changing constantly. So for the so you go into whitewater and you enable whitewater. I usually don't change any of the emission settings too much unless I have too many particles, in which case you can turn these emission rates down, you can turn down speeds, you can turn down the total number of particles, and there's a billion other particle settings, but mostly I would say I just turn them on and then I change these emitter settings if there's too many particles or too few or whatever. Next particle thing is in display. In whitewater display, I turn the particle size way down. By default, I think it's like 0.008, so I have it at like under a sixth of that, because the fluid simulation, the particles are a fixed size. And if you look at the scale of this world, it's only like 4 meters. So that means you'll have really big particles, as opposed to like if you had 40 meters, the particles would be a tenth the scale. So I just turned the scale down manually because the domain was so small. You got gravity and force field settings. Sometimes I turn the gravity down here. I guess here I decided to just edit the gravity inside of this force field, which I guess gives a pretty cool effect. But here I do edit the gravity a lot. It's pretty useful. And then I turn on surface tension always, and I use viscosity and sheeting, usually more when I have, viscosity is pretty specific if I have like a liquid other than water that I want to display. And then sheeting is like, you know how if you have like water flowing off of the edge of something, it tends to make like a very smooth sheet, like it's got a uniform thickness, it fills in all the gaps. Sheeting fills in the gaps. So usually if you have obstacles that the water is running over, the sheeting helps make it look more realistic and like water's actually flowing over something. Let's see. I think that is more or less everything I do in here. Oh, in the flip fluid surface, for the final bake, I turn the subdivision here to 1. There's a whole explanation for what that does, and particle scale too. But yeah, I just turn those on the one time before the final bake. I usually have it at 0 for the prior bakes or for the low res bakes because it just adds more time and just changes how things look visually. Okay, well that's everything for the domain. That's, so the fluid simulation is literally these 3 things. Just the fluid, the force field, and the domain. And then for the rest of the scene, I have a floor. And I have this HDRI. I use Pro Lighting Skies, but you can go to HDRI Haven and download HDRIs here and find a simple video for how to set them up. But HDRIs are sick because they make reflections from every angle, which gives the fluid a much more realistic view, especially if it's transparent. In this case, my fluid is not transparent, but it is reflective, so that light from every angle still adds quite a bit. So I'm using this material from Polygon, but it's super easy to make if you just like crank the metallic to 1 and you pick a base color that you like, and you turn the roughness down or to whatever level you want. You can get this nice gold kind of material. Ooh, look at that. How nice. Oh god, we're going everywhere. Sorry. Alright, cool. So there's that. The particles aren't showing up here because they're not set to show up in this view, but they have their own material as well, which a lot of my particles lately I've been doing an emissive material, so just emits this orange or whatever. It has transmission of 1, too. Honestly, I couldn't tell you because it's emissive what the difference of the transmissive particles and non-transmissive particles are, but I just like to tweak a lot of the settings. It's kind of the point of doing the fluid dailies. I'm just trying some things out. So here I just used an emission material, and I really like how it looked visually, but I would say that's pretty much everything. Got fluid material, particle material, whole sim setup. Oh, camera work. So usually I use the dolly camera rigs. If you go to camera and then dolly camera rig, I would highly recommend learning how those work because I use that a lot. It gives you some finer controls and makes it more like you're animating like a real camera. But here I just use a normal camera because I only did 2 shots. Important stuff with the camera, I guess the most important things usually are that it's like animated somehow, or that you set up your shots well, which is just filmmaking stuff, trial and error, especially with the fluid sims because everything's moving around a lot. The camera work can be really difficult, but that's something you just gotta grind out. And then super important thing for all the fluid sims and like most renders in my opinion in general is depth of field. So turn on depth of field for your camera. I usually like to use an empty, so I just parent the depth of field to this empty. You can just click E over this. That's a fun tip if you don't know that. You can click E when you're on top of these things, and that pulls up the eyedropper. And then you can click on the empty, and now the focus is there. And so it just blurs stuff in the background and the foreground. Just makes stuff look more realistic because every camera in real life has depth of field. So every time you're looking at footage, there's a depth of field element to that. So for your digital footage, if you want it to look more realistic, gotta use depth of field. But I think that is more or less everything. If you have any questions, you can let me know in the comments or what have you. I like talking about this stuff, so I'd love to fill you in. But for now, yeah, good luck.